Good morning, dear student. Dear student, today we are going to do our last topic, which is elasticity of demand from theory of supply. Dear student, in this particular chapter, we have already done meaning of supply, type of supply, supply schedule, supply curve, law of supply. Okay, we already done this in our previous video. We done change in quantity supplied and change in supply. Today we are going to do elasticity of supply. Okay, dear student. So let's begin with this particular topic. Dear student, if you talk about the elasticity of supply, you all are familiar that like theory of demand, we have theory of supply. Okay, which said that when price of a commodity increases, its quantity supplied increases. You already studied this particular theory. Okay, you know that in theory of supply, when price of a commodity increases, then quantity supplied also increases, and when price of a commodity decreases, its quantity supplied also decreases, and other thing remain constant. This is our law of supply. But dear student, this law of supply only is a qualitative concept. Okay, give it just tell us about the direction of change in quantity supplied because of change in price. Suppose price of a commodity initially is 10, then it increases from 10 to 15, and quantity supplied at rupees 10 is 100, and after when price increases it becomes 120. So the change you can see is the change in price is of 5 and the change in quantity is of 20. So the theory of supply just tell us the quality concept. Okay, that's why it is a quality concept. It cannot give us the measurement, the proper degree of change. Okay, the responsiveness, it just tell us the qualitative point of view. Okay, that's why the law of supply is a qualitative concept. It gives us the quality. Now if you talk about the quantitative, okay, if you have to measure the change, the measure of the degree of responsiveness, how much the price changes and how much the changes in price affect the quantity supplied, then you have to measure price elasticity of supply. Okay, dear student, which is represented by ES. This is the symbol of elasticity of supply. That's why price elasticity of supply is a measure of degree of response of supply for a good to change in its price. Okay, dear student. Now, in the words of Professor Marshall, elasticity of supply refers to the change in quantity supplied of a commodity in response to change in its price. So, this definition is given by Professor Marshall. Okay, and according to this definition, the elasticity of supply measures the change in quantity supplied, okay, of a commodity in response to change in price. Because of change in price, how much quantity supplied is affected, the degree, the responsiveness is measured by the price elasticity of supply. Now move to our next point, which is measurement of elasticity of supply. Dear student, there are so many methods of measuring elasticity of supply, like percentage method, proportionate method, arc method, geometric method. All these are different methods, but in our syllabus we have only percentage method. So dear student, according to percentage method, elasticity of supply is the ratio between percentage change in quantity supplied and percentage change in price of a commodity. Okay, in fact this method originated from the definition of price elasticity of supply. Dear student, the formula of percentage method you already studied in your demand chapter, where we studied the elasticity of demand. The same formula is repeating in this particular concept. Like price elasticity of supply is percentage change in quantity supplied divided by percentage change in price, and in case of demand it is percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price, and in case of supply the formula is repeating that percentage change in quantity supplied, okay, percentage change in quantity supplied divided by percentage change in price. Okay, when the percentage change in quantity supplied is divided by the percentage change in price, they simply represent the price elasticity of supply. So this is the formula of price elasticity of supply. Now move to our next part, which is calculation of percentage change in quantity supplied. You are already familiar with this particular terms. How can we measure the percentage change in quantity supplied? How can we measure the percentage change in price? Because in your demand case you already studied about these terms. Okay, as I told you earlier that whenever you do the question of elasticity of supply or demand, you have to plot a table. First of all, you have to plot P. Okay student, then you have to draw a line and write down the Q. This is the price table, this is a quantity table. Then go with the question, and initially you will find the initial price, which is P. Next time when you find the price, it is your P1, new price. Similarly, the initial quantity is Q and the new quantity is Q1. Okay, now the difference between Q1 and Q is known as delta Q, and the difference between P1 and P is known as delta P, change in P. So always keep in mind, P is the initial price, Q is the initial quantity, P1 is the new price, Q1 is the new quantity, and the difference between them is delta Q, and the difference between price is known as delta P. So these are the basic concept of our question. Okay, now move to our point, which is calculation of percentage change in quantity supplied. Okay, how much percentage change in quantity supply you can measure. Suppose this is your quantity and this is price 10, then price 20, and it is 100 and then becomes 120. Then how much the percentage change in quantity supply? We are talking about this point. Suppose initially it was 100, then next time it is 120. Then how can you measure the percentage change in this quantity supplied? Okay, so the method is delta Q divided by Q into 100. This is the formula of measuring quantity supplied. Okay, so you can measure quantity supplied with the help of this particular formula, delta Q divided by Q, which is initial quantity, into 100. Now what is delta Q? Dear student, delta Q is change in quantity. You can measure delta Q as Q1 minus Q, new quantity minus old quantity. Okay, in the case of numerical, we have 120 minus 100. So 20 is our delta Q. Okay, 120 is our new quantity. When we subtract the old quantity from it, we can get a change in quantity, which is 20. So this is the formula of measuring the percentage change in quantity supplied. Dear student, in this in your book you have this formula. So be careful that there is some printing mistake in this formula. It is delta Q, and this is not initial price, this is your Q. So delta Q divided by Q into 100. Now this formula is right. Okay, this is the formula of percentage change in quantity supplied. Similarly, you can see this formula here. This is the formula. Similarly, the percentage change in quantity, the percentage change in price is measured with the help of this formula also. Okay, which is delta Q upon P into 100. Now the percentage change in price. Suppose initially the price is rupees 10, then it's become rupees 20. So you can easily see that the percentage change in price. So you can measure the percentage change in price with the help of these two. We have initial price, we have new price. Now 10 say 20. Now the price goes from 10 to 20. Now the percentage change in price is measured as the difference between them, which is delta P divided by P, which is 10 into 100. So you can easily measure the percentage change in price as delta P divided by P into 100. In our case, we have delta P, which is 20 minus 10, and which is 10. Okay, so by putting the value, you can easily find out your percentage change in price, which is in our case 10, which is delta P divided by price, which is 10 into 100. So you can find that the percentage change in price is 100% in your case. Okay student, so this is the formula of percentage change in price, this is the formula of percentage change in quantity. And when you put these formula into a algebraic form like this, Okay, as our formula stated that elasticity of supply is percentage change in quantity supplied divided by percentage change in price. When you put these formula together, you will find our main algebraic formula, which is elasticity of supply is delta Q upon delta P into P upon Q. It is similarly like our demand formula, but this time we have elasticity of supply. In the case of demand, you already studied that elasticity of demand equals to delta Q upon delta P into P upon Q. The same thing you find in the formula of elasticity of supply. Elasticity of supply equals to delta Q upon delta P into P upon Q. P is the initial price, Q is the initial quantity, delta Q is the change in quantity, delta P is the change in price. Okay, delta Q you can measure as Q1 minus Q, and delta P equals to P1 minus P. So you can note down these formula, dear student. Elasticity of supply you can measure by this formula, and delta Q delta P you can measure by this formula. So this is the formula of elasticity of supply. Now let us explain this formula with the help of a numerical example. Now in this numerical example, suppose at a price of rupees 30 per kg, supply of sugar is 100 kg. So make the table again. Initially, as I told you that you have to make a table P and Q. Now the price of sugar is 30 at rupees 30. The supply of sugar is 100 kg. Okay. Now move to our next part, which is its supply expands to 150 kg. Now the quantity is extended by 150 kg. In this case, price elasticity of sugar will be calculated as under. Okay. Now you can see that when price of a commodity price of sugar is 30, the quantity supplied is 100 kg. The price rises by rupees 35. Price is rises by rupees 35. Then you can see, okay, I will repeat this. Okay, initially we have price and quantity. When price of a commodity is 30, then quantity supplied is 100. When price of a commodity increased by 35, the quantity supplied is 150. So we have this. Okay, you can plot your question like this. Now you can easily calculate the delta q, which is 150 minus 100, and you can get 50. You can see delta q as 50. Delta p, similarly you can get delta p. Delta p means 35 minus 30. You can easily get 5. P is already given to you, Q is already given to you. Now put these value in our formula, which is elasticity of supply equals to delta Q upon delta P into P upon Q. Now we calculated delta Q as 50, delta P as 5, P is already given 30, Q is already given 100. By solving this, we can get elasticity as 3. So you can say that it implies that if price changes by 1%, quantity supplied is changes by 3%, because our elasticity of supply is 3. So if price changes by 1%, quantity supplied is changes by 3%. So this is the formula of elasticity of supply, and this is the numerical of elasticity of supply. Yes student, this numerical is too simple as like our demand, so you can easily do this numerical and these type of numerical. Okay student, let's move to our next part, which is type of elasticity of supply. Dear student, like elasticity of demand, similarly we have 5 types of elasticity of supply. Okay, we have 5 degrees of elasticity of supply. The first one is perfectly inelastic supply. Dear student, perfectly inelastic supply means if there is no change in quantity supplied, will change in price of a product. Suppose the price of a product is changing and there is no change in quantity supplied, it is simply known as perfectly inelastic supply. In this case, elasticity of supply equals to 0. The diagram of this is like this. Okay, there is no change in quantity supplied. You can see that quantity supplied it as Q, or whatever price you are changing, you have different price P1, P2, P3. So When there is no change in quantity supplied, only price changes, it is simply represented as price inelastic supply, which is known as perfectly inelastic supply. Okay, in this case, your elasticity of supply equals to infinity. Always, your elasticity of supply equals to 0. Always keep in mind. Okay, dear student. Now let's move to our next point, which is perfectly elastic supply. Dear student, perfectly elastic supply means when the supply of a commodity changes with change in its price. Okay, supply of a commodity changes with change in its price. The supply of a commodity changes without change in its price. Okay, without change in price, the supply of a commodity will be called perfectly elastic. So be careful, when the supply of a commodity changes without change in the price, your price remain constant and your quantity supplied changes, it is simply known as perfectly elastic supply. Dear student, in this case you will get a supply curve like this, which is parallel to x-axis. So you can see that there is no change in price remain constant at point P. You can change your quantity like this: q, q1, q2. So these are the different quantities. So you can say that a perfectly elastic supply means when price of a commodity remain constant and the quantity supplied of a commodity is only changes. Okay, or you can say that when the supply of a commodity changes without change in price, it is simply known as perfectly elastic supply. Okay, student, now let's move to our next part, which is relatively elastic supply. Dear student, relatively elastic supply or elastic supply means supply of a commodity will said to be elastic if the percentage change in quantity supply exceeds the percentage change in price of a commodity. In this case, you can see that price changes from 30 to 40, but the quantity supplied changes from 100 to 150. So the change in quantity supplied is greater as compared to the change in price. In this case, your elasticity of supply is greater than 1. In this case, the elasticity of supply is greater than 1, and this diagram is represented as this. Okay, it simply represents, dear student, it simply represents that the change in quantity supplied is more as compared to the change in price. Okay, so I draw this diagram. The change in quantity supplied is more with this symbol, and the change in price is less as compared to the change in quantity supplied. So this is known as elastic supply. Now move to our next part, which is inelastic supply. Dear student, inelastic supply is known as when elasticity of supply is less than 1. In this case, the percentage change in quantity supplied is less than the percentage change in price. Okay, dear student, it simply represents that price is changing in too high. It simply represents the change in price is too high as compared to the change in quantity, which is too low. You can see that when price is rupees 1000, quantity supplied is 20. When price changes to 2000, quantity supplied is 30. It simply represents that change in price is more as compared to the change in quantity supplied. So this is known as inelastic supply. Okay, student, now move to our next point, which is our last degree, is unitary elastic supply. In this case, your elasticity of supply equals to 1, dear student. It simply represents that the percentage change in quantity supplied is equal to the percentage change in price. Suppose the quantity supplied is changed by 10%, similarly the price changes by 10%. This is simply known as unitary elastic supply. You can see with the help of table that the change in price is from 10 to 15 and the quantity supplied changes from 20 to 30. So the change in price is of 50% and the change in quantity supplied is also of 50%. So we can see that the both are equal. So the when the percentage change in quantity supplied equals to the percentage change in price, it's simply known as unitary elastic supply. Okay, student, you can see with the help of this particular table. Okay, you can see the different degrees of elasticity and different type of elastic, like when es equals to 0, it is known as perfectly elastic. In this case, the change in price does not affect the supply at all. So you can see this table which I explained you above. Okay, now our last part is Factors determining elasticity of supply. This is our last point, dear student. Factors determining elasticity of supply. Now elasticity of supply is determined by so many factors. Few of them are, the number one is possibility of shifting from production. Dear student, always keep in mind that when the production shifting possibility is happen in the economy, okay, if the economy have the possibility of shifting the production, suppose in an agriculture field, in agriculture land, if you can shift your agriculture land, if you can shift your labor, okay, if you can switch between the labor and the land, and you can switch between from one crop to another crop, it simply represents the shift from production. When shift from production is possible, then in this case the supply of one crop will be more elastic than if they cannot be easily shifted. So always keep in mind, suppose you are producing wheat and suddenly you have the possibility that you can shift from wheat to rice and rice to maize. In this case your supply curve is more elastic as compared to if you cannot shift. So be careful, when the shift in production is possible, in this case your supply curve is more elastic. Okay, next point is length of time. Okay, price elasticity of supply also depend upon the length of time for response. Okay, it may be difficult to change quantity supplied in few weeks or month in response to price change. Okay, now suppose price of a commodity changes, you cannot change your supply too much, or you cannot frequently change your supply. But if it is possible, then it is good for you. So in the short run, like the period of less than 1 year, or the period of 6 months, 4 months, 3 months, it is known as short period. So in the short period the supply is inelastic always, and in the long run or long period more than 1 year, the supply curve is always elastic. So be careful. Okay, dear student, next is behavior of cost of production. Okay, elasticity of supply is greatly influenced by how cost of production responds to output changes. Okay, if an increase in output by the firm is an industry causes only a slight increase in their cost per unit or leads to decrease in cost per unit, so supply will be fairly elastic. Okay, now be careful, if the input which you are using, input we have land, labor, capital, if you are using these inputs and the increase in output by the firm, okay, your the increase in output, the output which these input produce in your firm, okay, if slightly increase in their cost per unit or leads to decrease in cost per unit, suppose your cost is increasing by per unit and your cost is decreasing by per unit, okay, then in this case supply will be elastic. And on the other hand, if increase in supply leads to a large increase in cost of production, suppose you are increasing your supply and due to the increase in supply your cost of production is increasing, it simply represents that the supply would be relatively inelastic. Okay, suppose you are producing a shirt, okay, and initially you are producing 100 shirts, okay, now you increases the quantity supplied from 100 to 1000 shirts. In this case your price respond, or your cost of production, the expenditure which you are doing is also increases too much, in this case your supply curve is inelastic. Okay, dear student, next point is nature of commodity. Nature of commodity also determine the supply, also affect the price elasticity of supply. If a commodity is durable, it can be stored for a long time, okay, and a producer can meet the changes the market demand either by running down their stock or by building up more stock. So therefore supply of such good means the supply of durable goods. Okay, in this case the supply of these good is elastic. Always keep in mind, because these are durable goods and there are perishable goods which you can use within 1 and 2 days, okay, like milk, vegetable, etc. Okay, then in case of these goods the supply is always inelastic. Okay, so always keep in mind that supply of perishable goods like milk, vegetable is relatively inelastic as compared to the durable goods. Okay, student, our last point is risk taking. Okay, risk taking is also influence our elasticity of supply. Suppose elasticity of supply is determined by the willingness of the entrepreneurs to take risk. If entrepreneurs are willing to take more risk, then supply will be more elastic. On the other hand, if entrepreneur hesitate to take risk, the supply will be inelastic. So it's totally depend upon the entrepreneur. If he has the willing to take risk, then supply is more elastic, and if he is not willing or hesitate to take risk, then its supply is inelastic. So student, that's it for today. Okay, now our chapter, we have finished our chapter in this point of time. Okay, so our theory of supply is completed. In case if you have any doubt, you can ask me. Thank you student, stay safe, stay healthy.